Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Sunday, August 17th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside today will reach a high of 88.1 degrees Fahrenheit, with the low dropping to 64.7 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a day that certainly feels like late summer, so remember to stay hydrated if you're out and about. We'll be discussing important developments in our segment today. First, we'll dive into the motivations behind the federal crackdown happening in Washington, D.C., examining what exactly is prompting this increased presence. Then, we'll shift our focus to a significant legal decision, looking at why a judge chose to uphold crucial protections for immigrant children, exploring the implications of that ruling. All this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Good morning, everyone. We begin this morning with a significant development out of Washington, D.C., where the nation's capital is seeing an unprecedented surge of federal intervention. For more on this unfolding story, we turn to our seasoned reporter, Ethan. Ethan, what can you tell us about the increased National Guard presence?
Good morning, Grace. D.C. is certainly under the federal spotlight. Just yesterday, Saturday, August 16th, 2025, 3 Republican-led states announced plans to send hundreds of National Guard troops to Washington, D.C. This move, according to National Public Radio and the Associated Press, is a significant escalation spearheaded by the Trump administration, ostensibly to bolster policing and implement a federal crackdown on crime and homelessness.
Hundreds of troops from individual states. That's quite a deployment. Can you break down the numbers and the overall impact?
Absolutely, Grace. West Virginia, according to CNN Politics, will deploy between 300 and 400 Guard troops, with Governor Patrick Morrisey stating they are, quote, proud to stand with President Trump, end quote. South Carolina pledged 200 Guard members, with Governor Henry McMaster authorizing this at the Pentagon's request, with the caveat from sc.gov that they can be recalled for natural disasters. Ohio plans to send 150 military police for, quote, presence patrols, end quote, as CBS News reported. These new deployments, totaling between 650 and 750 troops, will add to the approximately 800 District of Columbia National Guard members already activated, bringing the total to over 1,500. These deployments are federally funded under Title 32 orders, meaning Guard members remain under their state governor's command, but are federally regulated, allowing them more flexibility in law enforcement support without violating the Posse Comitatus Act.
That's a comprehensive picture of the troop strength. Now, the administration cites an, quote, emergency, end quote. What are their specific objectives for this significant intervention?
The president declared the emergency, citing the city government's, quote, failure to maintain public order, end quote, according to NPR and the AP. The core purpose is a, quote, federal crackdown on crime and homelessness, end quote. Newsweek.com quotes President Trump describing D.C. as overrun, aiming to, quote, take our capital back, end quote. This involves Guard troops clearing homeless encampments. 25 were removed Friday, August 15th, with individuals sent to shelters or jailed if they refuse. Attorney General Pam Bondi has also directed the Metropolitan Police Department to cooperate with federal immigration enforcement, targeting D.C.'s, quote, sanctuary city, end quote, status, noted by Columbia Law Review.
So a broad federal push on social and immigration policies. How are D.C. officials reacting to what some are calling a hostile takeover?
Not well, Grace. Mayor Muriel Bowser, a Democrat, strongly opposes it. She directly contradicts the administration's claims, stating violent crime in D.C. was at a 30-year low in 2024 and has declined further in 2025, according to Al Jazeera. She views it as a major challenge to the city's, quote, limited self-government, end quote, posting on X that, quote, American soldiers and airmen policing American citizens on American soil is un-American, end quote. D.C. even sued the Trump administration over an attempt to appoint an, quote, emergency police commissioner, end quote, but control was returned to D.C. Police Chief Pamela Smith, as CNN Politics reported. D.C. Attorney General Brian Schwalb labeled it a, quote, hostile takeover, end quote.
Strong words from city leadership. This really highlights D.C.'s unique legal status. What does this intervention mean for the balance of power? And what are the troops actually doing on the ground?
It's complex, Grace. D.C. operates under the Home Rule Act of 1973, granting limited self-governance, but Congress retains ultimate authority. The act prevents D.C. from controlling its own guard and allows the president temporary control of the MPD. Deploying out-of-state guard units raises questions about the Insurrection Act. Critics, including Mayor Bowser, see this as an affront to autonomy. On the ground, NPR and the AP report troops are patrolling landmarks, assisting with crowd control, and even, quote, area beautification, end quote, work. While not making arrests currently, a White House official told CNN Politics they, quote, may be armed, end quote, to provide a, quote, visible law enforcement presence, end quote, and deter crime.
It seems the goal is a visual deterrent and a political statement. What are the broader implications and public reactions?
Absolutely, Grace. Critics view this as, quote, unprecedented federal overreach, end quote, and a, quote, political power play, end quote, as reported by Newsweek. It's seen as testing, quote, boundaries of presidential power, end quote, and potentially a, quote, blueprint, end quote, for interventions in other Democratic-led cities, according to Lawfare Media. It also reinforces the Trump administration's, quote, tough-on-crime rhetoric, end quote, rallying its political base, notes The Washington Post. Public reaction is mixed. Protests have occurred, with signs like, quote, no fascist takeover of D.C., end quote, as NPR and the AP reported. An Army veteran called it a, quote, power grab, end quote, as CNN Politics reported.
Ethan, thank you for breaking down this complex and evolving situation for us. It certainly puts D.C. in a unique spotlight.
My pleasure, Grace.
And that's our first story this morning. When we come back, we'll be looking at another major headline dominating the news. Stay with us. Welcome back. Our next story focuses on a pivotal legal development that has significant implications for immigration policy and the treatment of children in federal custody. For more on this, we turn to our reporter, Chloe. Chloe, what's the latest?
Grace, just yesterday on August 16, 2025, U.S. District Judge Dolly Gee in Los Angeles delivered a definitive ruling, rejecting the Trump administration's attempt to terminate the Flores settlement agreement. This decision is a major win for immigrant children and their advocates, ensuring the continued application of vital protections and judicial oversight.
So this Flores Settlement Agreement, or FSA, it sounds like it's quite the cornerstone. For our viewers who might not be familiar, can you break down what exactly the FSA is and why it's so important?
Absolutely, Grace. The Flores Settlement Agreement, which has been in place for nearly 3 decades, is a landmark policy that sets national minimum standards for the detention, release, and treatment of all immigrant children, whether they arrive alone or with family. It was born out of lawsuits filed in the 1980s, most notably Flores v. Meese in 1985, prompted by the discovery of children held indefinitely in what were described as, quote, prison-like, unquote, unsafe, unquote, and, quote, unsanitary, unquote, facilities, sometimes alongside unrelated adults. Back then, according to womensrefugeecommission.org and youthlaw.org, there were virtually no national standards of care.
That sounds like a dire situation. So what specific protections does the FSA provide now?
Well, the FSA, signed as a consent decree, mandates that facilities must be safe and sanitary, provide access to lawyers, and, crucially, ensure the expeditious release of children from federal custody. It also imposes strict time limits on detention. For example, U.S. Customs and Border Protection is generally limited to holding child immigrants for 72 hours. After that, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services typically takes custody. And according to ImmigrationQuestion.com and WashingtonPost.com, Judge Gee has consistently interpreted the general requirement for release, quote, without unnecessary delay, unquote, to typically mean within 20 days for minors.
20 days seems like a reasonable limit. The Trump administration has tried to end this agreement before, haven't they? What were their arguments this time? And why did Judge Gee reject them so definitively?
They certainly have, Grace. The administration has made repeated attempts to undermine Flores, dating back to 2019. This latest request, as reported by WashingtonPost.com and Layist.com, argued that significant improvements in detention conditions made the FSA unnecessary. They also claimed it hindered their ability to expand family detention capacity and hold families together for extended periods, despite receiving billions in funding for new immigration facilities. Government attorneys even asserted that a recent bill should grant them authority to hold families indefinitely, a provision they claimed was voided by the Flores Agreement.
And Judge Gee's response?
According to immigrationquestion.com, Judge Gee, who also presided over the 2019 attempt, described the current case as, quote, déjà vu, unquote. She emphasized that the underlying law and facts remained unchanged. She called the administration's argument, quote, nonsensical, unquote, stating that the progress achieved under the FSA demonstrated its effectiveness, not a reason for its elimination. Her ruling, as confirmed by CBSNews.com, reinforces Flores as a critical legal measure to prevent the prolonged detention of immigrant children at U.S. borders and ensures ongoing court oversight.
It sounds like she really put her foot down. But despite these standards, are there still issues with children being held beyond these limits?
Unfortunately, yes, Grace. Despite the FSA's clear standards, recent data highlights continued violations. According to immigrationquestion.com and youthlaw.org, in May 2025, 46 children were reported to have been held by Customs and Border Protection for over a week, with some detained for as long as 19 days. And even more troubling, reports from March and April 2025 showed 213 children, including toddlers, were held for more than 72 hours. 14 of those children were detained for over 20 days in April, some in, quote, prison-like conditions, unquote, with inadequate access to basic necessities.
That's incredibly concerning. And what about the so-called, quote, binary choice, unquote, argument?
That's a key point, Grace. The FSA's strict time limits, particularly the 20-day rule, are argued to create a, quote, binary choice, unquote, for authorities dealing with immigrant families. This means the government must either release an entire family unit pending a lengthy asylum process or separate parents from their children to comply with the agreement. The asylum process can extend for months or even years, far exceeding the 20-day limit, and licensed facilities for long-term family detention that comply with Flores standards are scarce. The administration's, quote, One Big Beautiful Bill Act, unquote, passed in July 2025, included provisions aimed at allowing indefinite detention, which Flores currently prohibits.
So essentially, they argue Flores forces family separation.
That's their argument, but legal experts and advocates, including those from visaverge.com and youthlaw.org, strongly push back. They contend that prolonged detention, even as a family unit, is inherently harmful to children and families. They view the government's aim to detain families indefinitely as a punitive measure. They assert that Flores mandates placement in the, quote, least restrictive setting appropriate for children, unquote, and release, quote, without unnecessary delay, unquote, aligning with community-based alternatives, not extended confinement. They argue the solution is faster asylum processing and expanding alternatives, not removing protections.
And Chloe, I've heard reports of a rather alarming facility being discussed, something called, quote, Alligator Alcatraz, unquote. What can you tell us about that?
That's right, Grace. Attorneys for immigrant children have requested the court to expand independent monitoring of Customs and Border Protection facilities beyond just the current El Paso and Rio Grande Valley regions, citing evidence of widespread violations. While Judge Gee has not yet issued a ruling on this specific request as of today, August 17, 2025, a key example cited by advocates is a Florida detention center reportedly dubbed, quote, Alligator Alcatraz, unquote. This temporary facility, located in the Florida Everglades, was rapidly constructed in just 8 days. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis described it as a, quote, deportation depot, unquote, for undocumented immigrants, according to reporting by layus.com and foxla.com.
And what are the conditions reportedly like there?
Despite initial claims that it would house, quote, the worst of the worst, unquote, reports, including from the Inquirer.net and the Independent.co.uk, indicate many detainees, even DACA recipients and a 15-year-old boy, have been held there without criminal histories. Allegations of, quote, inhumane, unquote, and, quote, dehumanizing, unquote, conditions are widespread. This includes detainees held in cages in extreme heat, broken toilets, inadequate air conditioning, insufficient food, bug infestations, and a lack of medical care. These conditions have reportedly led to hunger strikes. These alleged abuses at, quote, Alligator Alcatraz, unquote, and other Florida centers are central to the argument for expanded independent monitoring.
It certainly sounds like a pressing need for oversight. Chloe, thank you so much for shedding light on this crucial issue and explaining the complexities of the Flores Settlement Agreement.
My pleasure, Grace.
We'll be right back after this short break. Here are some other headlines. In Sudan, a humanitarian catastrophe is worsening after a paramilitary group shelled a camp for famine-stricken people in the Darfur region. The Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, are being blamed for the artillery strike on the Abu Shuk camp, which killed at least 31 individuals, including 7 children and a pregnant woman. This was the second deadly attack on the camp in less than a week. The shelling is part of a brutal siege on the city of Al-Fashir, the last military stronghold in the region. The broader conflict has displaced nearly 14 million people, pushing parts of the nation to the brink of starvation, with reports of people eating animal fodder to survive amidst a cholera outbreak. Meanwhile, a devastating wave of monsoon flooding is making a splash for all the wrong reasons in northwestern Pakistan. The death toll has surged to at least 220 as landslides and flash floods have flattened entire villages. The mountainous Buner district has been hit hardest, where one police officer said a stream swelled without warning, unleashing tons of rocks that obliterated dozens of homes in moments. Rescue efforts are being washed out by the challenging terrain, and with forecasters predicting more heavy rainfall, the nation remains on high alert. In Bolivia, former President Evo Morales finds his political career under arrest. A constitutional court ruling has barred him from running in the upcoming presidential election, citing term limits. Compounding his problems, a judge has issued a warrant for his arrest on serious criminal charges, which he denies. Confined to his jungle stronghold by loyal supporters, Morales is urging his followers to cast void ballots in the election, hoping to delegitimize a race he cannot enter. This power struggle with his successor has fractured his political party, creating a major opening for the right-wing opposition. And a major data breach in the UK is leaving sensitive information up in the air. The personal data of around 700 people, including Afghan evacuees and British troops, was exposed in a ransomware attack on a Ministry of Defense contractor, In-Flight the Jet Center. The breach exposed names, passport details, and critical relocation reference numbers that could link Afghans directly to their work with British forces, putting them and their families at grave risk. This is not the first time. Following a pattern of what critics are calling staggering incompetence in protecting vulnerable allies. Closer to home, a new Air Force policy is effectively grounding the careers of transgender service members. A new directive mandates that troops diagnosed with gender dysphoria be denied a hearing before a separation board, which must now recommend their discharge. This removes the board's discretion, which has previously allowed service members facing serious charges like assault to be retained. Critics are calling the move a betrayal that is causing significant turbulence, arguing it unlawfully removes the impartiality of the review process and abruptly ends the careers of dedicated service members. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 4.0, Gemini Pro 2.5, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.